It is already my pleasure and privilege to welcome you, Matt Knoll, to what is about to be home court health, with a focus on, especially on the court, of the wide and wonderful and magical world of tennis, which you have been uh, planting seeds in for a long time. And the inspiration for this podcast was, I remember last summer in 24, listening to your conversation with Steve Smith of the Great Base Tennis platform and podcast and educational system, and just the way that you engage with him, and so many personal topics that you two unearthed together. I just remember I was working on my deck outside and said, I'm really picking up what Matt is putting down from your experience, the way you're able to deliver not just the benefit of the lessons you learned on court as a collegiate men's tennis coach for many years at Baylor University, now taking that to the field of play and competition and growth and character development, that is the placement of young men and women throughout the collegiate athletic world. And I do believe that that is a service that is highly valued and highly valuable. And I think one place that I'd like to start, sometimes I start at the beginning, sometimes I start, you can take us back to your birth and your biography as much as you'd like, but certainly one thread in the skein of our conversation that I wanted to follow was, what were the signs and the intuition you had at any point in your life that the teacher archetype, that role, was something that you really wanted to invest your time and your energy and your blood, sweat, and tears in? I mean, people, as you know, go, part of the college path is, what will I do after college? Who will I become? And for anyone to have clarity on their purpose, I'm certainly drawn to that. I'm inspired by that. And so I'd love to hear from your perspective, what gave you the inkling that any form of teaching was the path that you wanted to follow. And with that, welcome, Matt.
Well, thanks, Tom. Great to be here. It's great to meet you. And you referenced Steve Smith. You've known him a long time. A lot of his acolytes that are out there spreading the good news of
How,
his
how
method.
long have you known him, Matt? Because I'm always curious what his network is.
Oh gosh, you age me 30 some years.
Wow. Okay.
So yeah, long time. But in a lot of Dave Anderson, who's there in Dallas, has been a good friend and
Good.
a guy I've known really, really well. And so I've gotten to know him especially well over the long time. But yeah, I'm not very smart. I didn't have a clear vision. I thought I was going to law school. And that was my plan the whole time. And then a friend of mine, a guy named Scott Tilkey, who just retired from Kenyon, got the head coaching job at South Alabama. And he called me and said, "Hey, I need you to come be my assistant. It's just me by myself, two teams." And I said, "Quit bothering me. I'm going to law school." And he called me back in a week and said, "Hey, got you a GA position. We'll pay for your master's." I said, "Oh, quit bothering me. I'm going to law school." And he kept calling me every week and finally broke me down and said, I called the law school and it turns out you can defer for a year, and come down here and just help me get started. I think you'd have a great time. So finally, long story short, I went, and he just did it in a wonderful way. Scott's a great man. He had two teams, and the way he structured it, really unusual. We practiced the two teams at the same time on 12 courts. And one week I would be essentially the head coach for the men, and he would take the women. And then if there was a match for the men, I would coach them, and he would coach the women. And the next week we would switch. So I got this amazing experience, being kind of a head coach of both genders at the Division I level as a 22-year-old. So it was really neat. And so I always had, he was always there to help me when I got stuck on something. But he just gave me free reign. I was able to kind of do whatever I wanted, and fell in love with it, long story short. So that was what led me to get into coaching, and I ended up not going to law school. And so I really owe Scott a lot to kind of help me find that passion and that direction in my life.
Well, I mean, that's certainly potent ground for growth. Like you said, to have access to the two genders at that level, young men and women. I as I said offline, going to an all boys high school. My wife actually went to an all girls high school, and so we have unique experience of being in that fraternity, sorority sphere of influence and of growth. I mean, that's from ages 14 to 18, where you're not even remotely a finished product, and then you get competitive athletes of both, and to be in that role where you're still required to have some structure and initiative. I mean, that is certainly drinking from the fire hose. what were your resources at that time to, I mean, just to talk brass tacks, structure a practice, structure a season, to communicate that? How did you?
Yeah, I played in college, so I'd been around tennis some, and I worked in the summers at different camps, John Newcomb and some different places,
Oh,
and
really?
and
Cool.
and played played a little bit, and I'd been around tennis. I had some idea. I didn't really have a philosophy, per se. Scott is kind of a benevolent father figure type coach. I'm a more structured, kind of hard nosed type coach, and so he knew me and felt like I would add, to his be a good balance for him, and I think that we were a good balance. He had me take care of the physical conditioning, for example. That was something that I've always had an interest in, and I sort of ran that, right. And he had some philosophies. We stole some great ideas from Chuck Creasy, who anybody that wants to be a coach should get Chuck's book. I read it cover to cover several times.
What book is that?
I put me on the spot.
Oh,
I
sure.
don't know them.
I didn't know he had a book. I've listened to him on the podcast, and I know who he is.
Yeah, it's gosh, he probably wrote it 40 years ago, and so some of it's a little dated when you look at it now, but it's amazing. And the biggest thing was he had a plan. Chuck had a plan. He had a way of training. He had a way of approaching the game. Like it or don't like it, I think you've got to have a plan. And let's use Great Place as an example. They've got a structure that's easy to understand, that if you believe in it, it's going to work. And same thing with Chuck's stuff. So he was the first guy to really train tennis players hard. That was before people really worked out off court, back in that era. So we took a lot of the stuff that Chuck was doing and copied it, frankly. And it was great. Our guys got in great shape, and they felt like they were ahead of everybody else because they were more fit. And, the confidence they gained from that was really important to the success of our program. But in any case, Scott and I were a good fit for each other. He let me kind of run with some things. And, I've obviously made tons of mistakes, but I was able to make mistakes and just keep charging and keep learning. And, that was the objective, just to keep trying to get better.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's so important and intriguing to have that coaching staff. I mean, even if it's just the two of you, to have a balance in that polarity. If you were both hard-nosed hard asses, that's probably going to drag on everybody. And if you're both, benevolent, a little on the softer side, a little bit more on the intuitive side, you may not be able to keep the fire stoked for yourselves and the kids. So I mean that science experiment in and of itself, it sounds very, very fruitful. And I mean, that's certainly, Matt, part of why I was so genuinely interested in you and the way you were speaking, because of and I admire this about Steve and Dave and a lot of other coaches that I follow and listen to and admire, is that you are able to pull in inspiration from a wide array of coaches and coaching trees. And I don't think, I mean, I'm feeling charged up. I don't think it's too early to get into
Hey, Tom, can you give me 1 second? I've got something I got to deal with.
Do that. Go.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Yeah.
Amazing place.
See, I'm very poorly traveled, and I haven't been nearly anywhere. I went to Wimberley, Texas last September, which was awesome. I don't know if you know that area, or I know you have roots in Texas from the Baylor days, but and spent maybe half a day in Austin, and it was really cool. I was born in Santa Monica. That's my claim to fame, and I have family all throughout California. Yeah. Although I have never spent much time, regrettably, in what is totally unfairly referred to as flyover states. And I know that I learned that one of your greatest inspirations as a coach was Dan Gable. And talk about someone with just, I think I'm actually looking at the John Wooden pyramid of success right now. I mean, I grew up, my dad, who's much older, my dad's in his mid 70s right now, was at UCLA in the Wooden days, getting his MBA. And so, I mean, when I first started to care about sports and who some of the figures were, my dad handed me John Wooden's book and told me about him and what he was about, and the stories that the likes of Steve tell of spending the first practice putting on your socks, lacing up your shoes. And I think we don't hear too many stories. First of all, I mean, at the pro level, easy for me to say, I don't see too many great role models for coaching. That's why I really appreciate college coaches or local coaches and the impact that they make. But Dan Gable was someone who, just from what I know on the periphery, really made an impact. And I mean, in a highly intensive sport like that, a blend with tennis, an individual competition with team support. And I would love, if you wouldn't mind, just to let you rap, riff, and rant on what you've learned. I understand it's secondhand from Dan Gable. You didn't study under him directly, but another gentleman, Oklahoma State coach. Let's start with Dan though, and what you pulled in from lessons of what it takes to be that kind of coach. And correct me if I'm wrong, Matt. Pretty small roster for a wrestling team. Do you have a feel for how many guys are
Yeah,
on the
it's
varsity
small
wrestling?
roster. I think they have 10 weights in college.
Okay.
They've got, probably 3 guys per weight. Dan was a big fan of redshirting guys. I think the top teams
Yep.
do that a lot just to get bigger and stronger or get stronger.
And
Look,
compared to tennis, how many on a tennis roster?
bigger because, again, they've got 10 weights that are active,
Yep.
and they've got to have more guys on the bench because it's a contact sport. So guys are getting hurt.
Yeah.
Where in tennis, we don't have that, fortunately, as much. You speak about Wooden. I've got Coach Wooden signed. It's right over here on my wall, actually, the Pyramid of Success frame. So, yeah, it's same deal. Yeah, I went to Northern Iowa, was my first head coaching job, and my AD was a wonderful guy named Chris Retrieve, who had wrestled at Princeton and then been an associate AD at Stanford, and ended up being a wonderful mentor to me. And Northern Iowa had a nationally ranked wrestling team, and so because I wanted to hang out with Chris, we went to wrestling matches together, which were amazing.
Yeah.
And Dan Gable was a cult figure in Iowa, originally so, and it's amazing. I learned that the state high school wrestling tournament gets 20,000 people, to come to the high school wrestling tournament in Iowa. So it's an amazing thing. And anyway, I learned about Coach Gable and read his books and just learned what he does. And he was incredible, of course. And then when I started this, what I call the championship project, and the genesis of that was our team got pretty good at Baylor. We were top 5 in the country several years in a row, but I felt like we were missing something, to get over the top. And when I would approach, Dick Gould at Stanford, who won 17 championships, and I'd try to ask him for advice, he'd of course dismiss me because I was the competition, right? He's not going to tell me anything. And Manny Diaz at Georgia was another role model. They were winning championships. I was really watching the guys that actually won, who gets to the finish line. I think there's a huge difference, getting to the finish line. I talk about that in a book I'm doing now. I think there's really 3 phases to developing a program. There's the climb, when you kind of start from the beginning and get pretty competitive. And then there's winning a championship. And then there's maintaining excellence. I think both require very different skill sets. And I think the very best coaches are able to do all 3, right? John Wooden, of course, maybe is a good example of any. But so I tried to advance those different phases to learn from people that had done it. And the problem, of course, in our sport, as I say, they weren't giving up any information. So I just watched, and one of the things I noticed, they were calm in the heat of the battle. I see a lot of coaches, even now, they're running around like chickens with their heads cut off, screaming and yelling all over the place. And the guys that actually win it don't do that, or I wasn't seeing them do that. So that was something I learned. And then I thought, well, gosh, why don't I approach people in other sports that have won it? Because they would probably be more open. So I just went out to my network and said, hey, name a coach that you know of that's in a sport that's won championships that might be open to me reaching out to them. And, I got a big list of 20 people, and I sent everybody, it was in the days of a letter, sent everybody a letter and said, hey, here's who I am, and here's what we're doing, and would you be willing to share some advice? And Tom, I got some incredible responses. It was really fabulous.
I'm just quickly, Matt, I won't cut you off for long. The reflection that's coming to me from that, with the initiatives that I have of something similar, again, with a podcast. I mean, just to have that access, just to put myself out there and say in an email, or I've written Steve Smith a letter. He hasn't gotten back to me, but that's okay. He's got a full plate. I know it. I'm just that very much on my list of people to learn from virtually. And you put yourself out there and you do your best to communicate it via the written word of I'm a seeker.
Yeah.
And for anyone to respond to that is very gratifying and humbling. So are you able to reveal some other names on that list? Any
Well,
names
Bob Stoops, for example, who that time was OU.
Yeah, of course.
Dave Marsh, who won 20 national championships in swimming at Auburn at the time and went on to be the head of U.S. swimming. yeah, and just a lot of people like that were just unreal, you know.
Bob Stoops was at OU for, I mean, a lot.
Bob came in and won a national championship, I think, in the third year he was there.
Yeah.
And then was, you know, elite for a long time, and, you know, and finally stepped back. But he, again, just thinking about Bob in particular, Coach Stoops wrote and said, it shocked me, blocking and tackling, you know. And it was like, wow, you know, he sent me a big ream of paper talking about how they structure things and how they prioritize things. And really it was about, you know, back to your put your shoes on with Coach Wooden, fundamentals, you know. I mean, so here we are, you know, winning the national championship, and we're talking a lot about blocking and tackling. And there's so many things that you can be thinking about as a head coach, but it was neat to see. It was informative. I learned just thinking about, gosh, get back to basics, you know, keep it simple. Mm-hmm. And again, different people had different perspectives, and some were more generous with their time than others. Some were incredibly generous with their time and were happy to take my call whenever I called. And I did. And again, I learned a lot. And I think without that project, we wouldn't have won. You know, I coached our team that won it very differently than I coached the team the previous year. And I think some of those things, you know, made an impact.
Oh, I'm certain of that. And did you get responses from Dan Gable? Was he part of that network at all, or did you just do that secondhand from reading?
No, you know what happened was Chris Retrieve, who was my mentor, as we spoke, he said, I didn't want to. He said Dan Gable wasn't a good example. Okay. And I'll give you. I think I can remember the analogy. He said, you know, Coach Smith was at Oklahoma State, who is also fabulous. He said, you know, Dan's the kind of guy that, you know, can go out into the woods at night, kill his own food, cook it, clean up after himself, and he's, you know, he's that guy.
Yeah.
And Coach Smith's the kind of guy that can be out in the woods and figure out how to get somebody to bring food that's already prepared to him and have a really nice meal. So it didn't. Dan wasn't a perfect fit for what we were trying to do. I think the elements of what he brought in were really important to us when we were in that climb phase. You know, that let's be tougher, let's be more fit, let's be gritty, let's be resilient. Those are the themes of Dan Gable, which I think I gained a ton from. But as we moved into this next phase, I needed different voices.
Let's follow that, if you please. I mean, who were some of the voices, and what were some of the principles that led you to that achievement phase? And I think it's, you know, just to give you your flowers, Matt, I think that is brilliant to think of phases. What came to mind was relationship. You know, of course, different phases of relationship, and the especially the sustainability. I was listening to someone speak the other day about that. Sort of at both ends of the spectrum in a relationship, a committed relationship, is you enjoy each other's company. Be that companionship, that friendship is what's sustainable. It gets you, you know, attracted to one another at the beginning. You know, there's other factors. Whatever comes your way in between, if you can ride through that, then you have hopefully a life together, which I'm looking forward to. You know, my wife and I have been together 12 years in total now. You know, she knew me when I was 19 and far more immature than I am now. And as women are, she was far more mature than I. And a constant has been just the enjoyment of one another. And so that was just an extrapolation of different phases and having different approaches in all of that. So how about achievement phase? Yeah, I mean, things that started to make the mark for.
Yeah, I think one thing that one of the coaches told me about was, when you're good enough to win it, you don't have to worry about the regular season. You know, I think when you're on the climb, you're trying to make the NCAA tournament, or you're trying to, you know, win conference.
And you're sweating it. You're sweating it every week.
Every little detail, right? And I remember one of my first goals, you know, we joined the Big 12 and we'd never beaten Texas. You know, Texas was way out ahead of us. They were top 10 and they were whacking everybody. And we'd have a conference meeting at the conference tournament. And at that banquet, they would hand the regular season trophy to the winning coach. And so I watched the Texas coach go up, you know, 3 years in a row and get his trophy. And I was just sitting there thinking, I still remember this. I want to win that trophy. You know, I want to get that thing. So sure enough, in our fourth year, I got it, right? And now we go to the final side of the NCAAs, which in tennis at the time was 16. So the 16 best teams in the country.
What is it now?
It's 8 now.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
You know, and in other sports, it's 4. It just depends on different things. But it was 16. So you get there and you're in the Sweet 16, and it's pretty cool. And you look around, and every team has a conference championship T-shirt on. You know, you're walking around, we're Big 12 champs, but there's SEC and ACC and Pac-12 and all the different, everybody there won the conference. And you're like, well,
you're lucky, Matt. You're lucky that I remember the Pac. I remember the Pac-10.
yeah, right. There you go.
Reggie Bush, I think, was my first favorite athlete.
He was pretty good.
Yeah.
So it struck me that, okay, this really isn't that significant, when you get out into the bigger world. Okay, so we need to set, we have new objectives. We need to try to climb even higher. So talking to some coaches about, look, okay, if you feel like you're going to win the conference, which is kind of a given at a certain stage, and you're going to qualify for the final site, which we felt like was kind of a given. I think we did it 20 years in a row or something. Then, okay, how do you make the next step? Well, part of that is you have a plan for the year, right? So we made our practice schedule for the whole year before the year started. So we knew what we were going to do every day in practice over the whole spring. And we presented that schedule to the guys on the team. So they could look and say, okay, I've got a day off on Tuesday, April 19th. If I want to go and do something or, have something happen, they can plan ahead and know exactly what's going on. Now, we changed maybe what we did in practice given whatever the circumstances were, but we had a pretty rigorous schedule. Very, very rigorous, very planned out in terms of our physical training, right? We knew that we wanted to peak at the end. We want to try to play our best tennis at the end in the national championship match. So to build up to that, there were phases of training along the way that were important to build up to that. And it was a matter of, we had week 1, week 2, week 3 were all different. Week 4 was in recovery week. So then we'd go back to week 1, 1, 2, 3 recovery week. And each session, each segment, week 1 would get a little bit tougher, a little less recovery, et cetera. Week 2 would be a little tougher, a little less recovery, et cetera. We're training the different systems, anaerobic, aerobic, and lactate. So those are the 3 systems we're training, and then a week of recovery. Well, sometimes your hardest workout in the lactate week, which was the toughest week, might happen the day before a match.
Really?
And in the past you would okay, we're going to kind of lead up to that match, maybe take it easy and practice a couple of days to be fresh or whatever. We just went just as hard the day before a match as we would have otherwise. And so sometimes, I remember one match in particular, we were playing Texas A&M at their place, and they have a very good program, but we'd had a lot of success against them. We had our very toughest workout of the whole season the day before we played Texas A&M. And so, as coaches, you have to kind of decide, are we buying into this or not, right? Is this just kind of something we're talking about? Yeah. That's a big match. I mean, the fan base wants to beat them. That's a conference match. Their fans don't like us very much. It's a tough place to go and get beat up. So there are a lot of factors. And we just decided, look, we're committing to this. We're going to go ahead and do that. So, we've got guys that are basically, being carried off the field. I mean, they're cramping and we're just killing them in this workout. And then we've got the match, 24 hours later. So, sure enough, we weren't very good.
Okay. I was waiting to hear, and we swept them,
Wow, we weren't very good. And it was a long match. And it came down to the end and we lost. But now, again, as a coach, okay, how do you handle that, right? If you go ahead and start getting upset with the guys, then of course, you lose all your credibility. It's like, well, you remember what you did to us yesterday, right? You want us to buy into the training. You can't come in now when we don't perform and be upset. So we weren't upset. We went in to the locker room, said, all right, get your stuff. Let's go get something to eat and let's go home. And that was basically it. Well, you should have seen the guys when we came back to practice, right? They were not very happy. They're competitive. That didn't feel good for their fans to rub it in our face and for them to beat us and rub it in our face and all that comes with losing to a rival. And our practice level increased 20%, based on the bad feeling of losing that match. And we went on to achieve at the end, right? It really helped us to achieve at the end. Now, again, I think that you can only do that if you're good enough to win it. If you're reasonably not good enough to win the national championship, then that's not a good plan. You go try to win the Big 12. That's a pretty cool thing. We won the conference tournament, so we got our championship ring or whatever, and then we went on and achieved it at the end. So I think that's something that I learned from someone that was winning championships, that you've got to train through the season to prepare to play your best at the end. And, for guys that are competing in the Olympic Games, for example, that's pretty obvious, right? Coach Hart, who was our track coach at Baylor and was the Olympic coach in the 400 meters, coached Michael Johnson and Jeremy Warner and guys that won gold medals. And he made the observation, and I stole every good idea I could from Coach Hart. He's an absolute training genius. But he made the observation, Michael Johnson, every time he set a personal best, it was in a big meet. It was in a world championship or an Olympic final, right? He never went out in Helsinki in the middle of the seain and had a personal best, right? Because those meets
practice,
right. Those meets were set up to help him achieve in the gold medal final. He didn't. It wasn't in the first round of the Olympics. It wasn't in the second round. It was in the final, right? So everything was pointing towards that. And here's a guy that won a whole bucket full of gold medals, and he did that consistently over his whole career. And Coach Hart was responsible for that, right? He trained him in a way to make sure that would happen. And so that, again, that was the philosophy that so many of the very, very highest achievers have, that we tried to follow.
Thank you for sharing that. That's a tremendous snapshot of that phase for sure. And I love that you had access to a track and field mind, because I have found that maybe this will segue us a little bit into continuing the discussion of coaching tree. Coaches that I learned from that were products of their own coaching, that are fruits of their own coaching tree. I don't know if you know the names in the strength and conditioning world of Mike Boyle or Eric Cressy. Eric Cressy, really well known for his work in the baseball world, not only in New England, but East Coast down to Florida as well, especially with pitchers. And you're a baseball fan, Matt? Is that a world that you're privy to?
I played my whole childhood, but I don't follow it much anymore.
I don't think you're missing much these days. It's a much different game. I'm still fascinated by the training. I've been doing a really deep dive into hitting mechanics. I'm using the algorithms in my favor for my Instagram and YouTube content, and it's just a lot of Barry Bonds, a lot of Tony Gwynn, people who can really articulate their mechanics. And just to bring this full circle, hearing those guys, the Eric Cressys, the Mike Boyles, and coaches that I had give me names in the sprinting world. Charlie Francis, for instance, who worked with Carl Lewis and Michael Johnson at various times, and the mechanics of that, the training for that. And so you mentioning Coach Hart, I mean, they know that if you are sprinting, whether it's the 100, the 200, the 400, if you're doing that 7 bloody days a week, good luck. If you think that your sport is all you need to do every day of the blessed week to perform, then you're out to lunch. I mean, you are not going to have what you need when it matters. You still got to do reps, and you still have to do your skill work, and you still have to be in the gym, and there is some toughness involved. But I think another student of or contemporary of Charlie Francis was talking about, if I have a 400 meter athlete, I also don't need to run them 400 meters the 3 or 4 days of the week that we're practicing. And I don't want to take us too far afield. Are there principles of that, maybe specifically from Coach Hart or from the track world, that you took to the practice court? I mean, is it maybe the equivalency is match play? I mean, so many people think that they need live ball practice every day going into a match and things like that. And because I'm a student of the grade base, I see the value in hitting off a cone, shadow swinging in front of a mirror, taking things slow, and then ramping back up. So yeah, just as a riff on that, I mean, are there?
Well, I for sure took ideas from Coach Hart on the training side, right?
Okay,
and one of the things, again, back to your thing, he had his guys run slow.
Imagine that.
And slow being, to where you still talk. You're running at a pace where you can talk. And we used to do a thing with our team called Can't Beat Coach Runs. That was kind of week 1 of our training. And what that was is we'd just take off from the facility, and I would lead the run, and they couldn't run faster than me. So I could control the pace. If you tell the guys, go run a 5K, they're going to rip out there and be back in 15 minutes, right? Yeah. So, but if I'm in front, then they can't pass me, right? So I can control the pace. And if I feel like the pace is maybe a little slow, I can go a little faster, a little fast, I can go a little slower. And again, we're just going along and having a great time. We had some other traditions that we developed out of that were fun, that made it just a great way to hang out and build culture and all that.
Yeah.
In terms of the practice, I think, back to your point, you got to have a system, and if your system is, we're going to play sets every day. Okay. I mean, I think that might work, right? If your system is we're going to hit off a cone, okay, that might work too. There's a lot of different ways, but I think you have to find a system that you believe in, that you have evidence that it works. And if you do that, then your players are going to buy into it and they're going to get better. Again, it's got to be based on some, reasonable information. But if you have good information and good experience and you've been around good people that have succeeded with the system, you're probably going to succeed, and I think one of the things that I try to be is not be dogmatic. I want to be open-minded. I don't want to get so stuck in a system that when things aren't going well, the only way to get better is to drill down even deeper on your system, right? And I think some people make that mistake. We got to do our system even better. Well, okay, maybe, but maybe there's another way to add some things that might create great results that would be a little outside the things that you've had success with.
Any examples come to mind of that, Matt, of maybe somewhere that you had a blind spot or just a blockage in your system that you
well,
said,
I'll tell you that we had this idea that we wanted to try to help guys get ready to play the tour, right? And everybody we recruited once we got going was, their goal was to play pro tennis. And so almost all of our guys had ATP points or were very highly ranked ITF players who played in the junior Wimbledons and all those things. So they had a lot of experience and they had high goals. And we started we would make the mistake of trying to coach them to play like, a Grand Slam champion, and then what happens, right, is they miss all the time.
Yeah.
And now they're not good at all. Now they're just making all these mistakes. So we eventually got to the point where I would tell the guys, don't watch the Grand Slam champions. Don't watch Djokovic and Federer and those guys. They're playing a different sport than you are.
I remember hearing you say, I loved that. Yeah. Say more.
I think that was really important to us. Every time that we would get a little overexcited and try to start, coaching guys to play like Federer, they would regress. But when we said, okay, we're going to, again, go back to great fundamentals, simplicity, repeatable tactics, and then, of course, add some things as you go, but come from the bottom up instead of the top down. And you talk to guys like Benny or some of the other guys that we had that did pretty well after college. Look, when you get to the challenger level or you get to 100 in the world, then you've got to do some things a little bit differently, right? If you're going to beat guys that have been number one in the world, I think Benny beat 7 wins over guys that at one time were 7 in the world, or number one in the world, excuse me. That requires maybe a little bit something different. But to get, you watch TV, you only see the Grand Slam champions. They only show those guys, right? But if you go to the big tournaments and you look at the guys that are 80 in the world playing each other, it's.
Oh, when I had my director of tennis over for dinner last night, we were catching Nishikori versus Munar in Indian Wells, and I just looked at him. I said, "It is such a dogfight to win one match on that tour." And I remember I had that visceral experience watching Runa versus maybe Luca Nardi last year in Rome, and it's clay. It's so brutal. And I'm just like, it's so hard to just get through a match. At that level. And I mean, what the great pearl of wisdom that I took from you was, it echoed something that helped me with a shift. At my club level, 4-5 and playing 4-5-5-0 doubles around here, and it's plenty good level here in Greater Boston. I mean, a lot of former, Holy Cross, Harvard, MIT kids, stuff like that. But it was a great shift for me to realize that, number one, I don't need to play to beat, Roger Federer or anything like that. I'm just trying to. I'm paired against my opponent who's over there, whatever kind of day they're having. I still need to play my game. I love that when Steve Smith points out, he says, "There's one ball and it's on your side of the court." You don't have to steal it from somebody. It's there. You get to hit it. And then also the perspective, the larger perspective of, I'm not really trying to win the match. I'm trying to give my best effort on this one point. I'm trying to execute the best combination of fundamentals within the range of correctness, within the tactical, technical aspect of this point. And it's very freeing, again, not to. So that's a great shift, Matt, that you made of.
I do consulting with a lot of college teams. And I was out watching NC State play Stanford last weekend. It's a fabulous college match.
Big tilt. Yeah.
Fabulous college. A really, really fantastic environment. And one of the NC State guys was playing a guy at one of the bottom spots, and the Stanford guy was really struggling. I mean, he was not playing well at all. And the genius of what the NC State guy did is he let him play bad. He just let him lose. You know, he didn't say, okay, now I'm gonna do something special. He just kind of let the guy lose to him, and the guy lost to him pretty dramatically. You know, and it's one of those matches. You know, I think as a competitor, you walk off and go, I didn't really do anything, but actually he did. You know, he did something. He did what was required, and it was super impressive. And again, I think for a young player, that's not easy to do, you know, to get out of your own way and just kind of let the guy lose if he wants to lose.
Yeah. I was having that discussion the other day around the two most recent examples of someone being on the pro tour. I'm sure this happens at every level. Someone being really banged up on the court with Novak and Alcaraz. And there was Medvedev, another Serbian versus Tsitsipas, where that kid looked like he tore his hamstring in half and won the tiebreak, third set tiebreak. And at that level it's different, but in general, for some reason it does seem to be hard for people to do only what is necessary. Is like you don't have to. Sometimes if someone's hurt, you do have to ruthlessly execute. You move them. If they don't go for it, they don't go for it, or if they hit a weak ball. And there really does seem to be, I don't know what it is. I don't know what mind virus takes hold where people think they have to do so much with the ball. I've been, of course, I'm inspired by great base tennis. I've been crunching some great tennis math numbers of my own. And I, now working with high school kids, who I see, they try to do so much. And they're just trying to make their doubles team or have a single spot at their high school. And I said, well, the good news for you is you're playing doubles. The total area of the doubles court, or at least one side of the doubles court, when you take a tennis ball that is basically 2.5 inches in diameter, you can put something like 3,000 tennis balls on the surface area of that court. So you've got space to make it. Is the good news.
Yeah.
And people, I don't, we know the mind games that come with, looking through the net and all that. And, that's where it to feel freer, to not be confined with, you feel so limited that I have to do so much with this ball and take it to the crazy angle. But that's great. Just as on the mental level of you taking that shift is even though you have guys coming in with possibly that expectation to go chase their dream, is you're not going to get there if you don't have building blocks of the confidence that comes from winning, that comes from skill and know-how, and that great Vic Braden quote for sure. And you built that over 18 years for you at Baylor, Matt.
22.
22. Okay, wow. I haven't done anything for 22 years. I've barely been alive for 30. So that longevity. One of the questions I had, interestingly enough, that I wanted to ask you was, if you can take us back to if it was 97 or 98, staring down the barrel of, for what was it, $30,000 a year, working that job, and just, how did you say yes? How did you get the intuition that this was worthwhile, for a year, let alone for 22?
Well, I was really dumb, so I had that going for me. No one else wanted the job, thankfully, and so they gave it to me. Look, Baylor had no tradition, no facility, nothing really to offer. It was a regional university at the time. I had this, it's like I heard somebody ask somebody a question that was a movie producer, what would you give people advice about getting into the business? And his response was, if you can do anything else, do something else, because, it's really sexy, to be a movie producer, but not very many people make a living doing it. The entertainment industry is incredibly competitive and you're not going to probably make a living. And he said, I couldn't do anything else. This is all I wanted to do. And I would say I was the same. I couldn't do anything else. Yeah. This is all I wanted to do. And so I was just looking for an opportunity. I was at Kansas. I interviewed at Oregon after my first year at Kansas. I thought I was going to get the job, and at the last second, it didn't go my way. Went to another year there and then got this opportunity at Baylor. And frankly, the leadership at Baylor at the time was incredibly impressive. They had a new president. They had a new athletic director. They were committed to trying to be excellent in all aspects. They wanted to take the university academically to a whole new level. They wanted to take the athletic department to a whole new level. And again, at the time, remember, Baylor was basically a regional Baptist school. I was from Kansas, and I'd never really heard much about Baylor or seen much about them. But these guys had big dreams. and they convinced me that they were going to, support the program and build a facility and do some neat stuff. And guess what? They did. I mean, they really did. And we saw that, across the board. So again, it's just opportunity. And I felt like we'd have some runway to kind of go and make a difference. And it worked out.
Well, and you, again, having the benefit of a little bit of your biography, I know that you took with you, I think I have this chronology right. You took with you the work of Dr. Gevorkian and the Four Quarters Fitness, which I mean, that just sounded like pure serendipity, because he was working, or at least had an impact on community college in Kansas.
He was at Johnson County Community
Yeah,
College.
that's right.
Yeah. So I'm teaching at a club in Kansas City, and these guys I called them hitters. They were ball feeders from these big junior clinics that we had on 10 or 12 courts. And these guys are coming in, they can barely walk. I'm like, what's wrong with you guys? And they're all saying, we've got this guy just killing us, And so I started asking questions. It's an interest of mine. And they start telling me a little bit about what he does and his background. He was a Romanian, weightlifting coach, an Olympic coach, and trained some gold medalists.
Istvan Dvorak. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm like, wow, I got to meet this guy, So I get out there and I meet him, and he invites me to join the workouts. And so we're in a hallway, Tom. I mean, I'm not exaggerating. We're in a narrow hallway like you would have, between your bedroom and your restroom in your house, with dumbbells lined up down this hallway, 10 or 15 guys, and he's running us through it. And then we're on the stairwell that just goes, again, just in a normal office building, doing the stuff he does on the stairs. And we're just making it up, just trying to find space to get stuff done. But yeah, I guess it sounds like you've heard of the guy. He became a leading expert, in training in all those circles. And later, everybody I ever worked with that was a strength coach had listened to him and knew his stuff. And he speaks to when they get certified and all those conventions. And he's a leading guy in our country and certainly beyond. But again, as you say, serendipity. I was just really lucky to be in the right place at the right time. I stuck my nose in there, and then it goes without saying, I couldn't walk for about a week or 10 days. I was the guy was brutal. So
because so for I don't know if my listenership will know so much of this, some might, but really championed complex conditioning. I mean, for my money, it's the better form for athletes of CrossFit. CrossFit is all about bringing together different movements and disciplines, and I think there's a lot of good there. Probably too much overdoing, which some might accuse Dr. Gevorkian of, in that level. And still, I mean, I learned, I don't know if you know who Laird Hamilton is, professional surfer. Okay, so I've studied him for a while and had an opportunity to be part of a group where he came and spoke for 2.5 hours. It was a men's group, so we were talking about life stuff as well. But I mean, he really is. Of course, now he's popularized pool training, bringing in the breath. Of course, the lack of density you get from pool training, but in general, he really took the boon of that complex training as well, having half a dozen, maybe up to 8 exercises that you just go through, complete them as best you can, constant movement, take a little beat, keep rolling. I mean, that is the life of an athlete for the most part, not doing, 3 back squats and then sit down for 5 minutes and scroll on your phone. Like, I mean, a different generation anyway, but I mean, it is intensive. I don't know if you remember how long that workout lasts. I mean, they can go, it can be 45 to an hour if you're really grinding, but sounds like you took that with you as well. I mean, because you've alluded.
Well, I think if you talk to any guy that played for me at Baylor, the dumbbell complex, which is part of the foundation of our training. Everybody is going to tell stories about how they suffered through the dumbbell complex and the positive effect it had on them. And again, it's only for elite athletes. I mean, if you're not in top shape and training to compete at a very high level, don't do it, because all it's going to do is get you injured and make you hate life. I wouldn't even consider doing it right now. I mean, again, I wouldn't even consider it. But if you're trying to play at the highest level and be a professional athlete, it's remarkable. It takes a half an hour, 20 minutes, however long it takes, not long. Right. But it's amazing. And the other thing that really is attractive about it is you're not moving a lot of weight. It's not like you're going to hurt yourself, trying to get, 300 pounds over your head. you don't really have to do a ton of weight. So it's the risk of injury is minimized that way. And, but yeah, it's a foundation of everything that we accomplished at Baylor for sure.
And that seemed like a focal point for you is wanting to have that culture and that foundation of, I mean, yeah, I can imagine as a coach, if you're, whatever phase you're at, even if you're in the building phase, or you're thinking, okay, we do want to really perform at the time of achievement at season's end. If you're in the back of your mind deeply anxious or concerned, like, I don't know if these guys are that fit. I don't know if these guys really, have the legs or the lungs. Because you need both. I always ask people when they're coming back, after a layoff at tennis, I said, how are the legs and how are the lungs? I mean, because those can be two different training capacities. You really crush them in a Dvorkian complex like that, because you got to, I mean, really. I don't know if you know who Dan John is, but another leading strength and conditioning coach, similar era, similar generation as Dvorak. But he said literally everything is cardio. Your heart is always pumping.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of what kind of workout it is. How much are you engaging that? But also, I mean, yeah, you can give us a peek behind the curtain, Matt. It sounds like there was a cultural cornerstone as well of, we're going to go through this together. We're really going to have that strong fitness foundation, and that way, we're going to be dominant in that respect. And we have a lot of confidence comes from that when you step to the line and say, I'll stay out here for, as long as it takes to beat you.
Well, and what's great, Tom, I don't know if we were the fittest team, but our guys were positive 100% sure that we were the fittest team,
Yeah.
without doubt. And I don't know if we were the most together team and we had suffered together the most, but our guys were positive 100% sure that we were more together and had suffered together the most. And so, again, when you're talking about a team sport, you line up on 6 courts and you're out there playing. I can't overstate how much that helped us. We absolutely believe that down to our core. And something that I did, particularly at the beginning, we'd be out there at 6 a.m. doing that crazy running and that crazy stuff we were doing. And I'd yell out, Stanford's not doing this. UCLA's not doing this. Georgia's not doing this. I'd scream that out all the time. Those were the elite teams at the time that we were trying to pursue at the highest level.
You sure beat up on UCLA when you had the chance, and
they got us plenty of times too. To be honest,
but one time when it really mattered, didn't you sweep them in the?
We did. We had a good day.
That's great.
Great program. We had a great rivalry with them and played them a lot. But yeah, I mean, so I think that was ringing in their head, right? And so when we got out there against those other programs that were the top programs, we believed that we were more prepared physically than everybody else. I think we were, and I know we thought we were, and that, I think that was a big part of why we succeeded.
And what would be another kindred belief that you work to instill in them as well? I mean,
I think that we were more together. I think as a head coach, you have an obligation to fill the room with like-minded people, whatever that means, right? And for us, we wanted to be, grittier, more resilient, more together, tougher than everybody else. And so when you recruit to that, you try to be very transparent. This is what we do. And I'll tell you a quick story. We had a boy in from Europe that was a really good prospect. And we had a tough training day, and he watched it. And afterwards he's like, it's not for me. I don't want to be pushed like this. I don't want the coach to be this tough on me. And look, my philosophy, Tom, was, look, we're going to practice for 2 hours and I'm going to be a certain guy, in that 2 hours, because we're going to try to focus and play at a high level. After that, I'm going to be your best friend, so the difference between my demeanor during practice time and every other time was radically different. He was a guy, he saw how I was in the practice and he needed to hate my guts for the way that I was treating the guys, during practice. It was just pushing them hard and holding them accountable.
Which just to pull on that for a minute, Matt, because I've seen some good content on that recently. People really do. I don't know if it's deliberate or just misunderstanding or what, but they do conflate that. Is you're not just being a prick to ruin their day. I mean, there's a level, and I hope we'll explore some more of that in this conversation of how the culture shifted away from that, where, I mean, people take that so personally that, God forbid someone, who's tasked with leading this group of us, has a very high standard, not because it's Matt Knoll's standard and, you kids can never reach it. It's rising tide lifts all boats. We do need accountability. We need radical accountability. We need that level of brothership, togethership. My dear friend Matt Coleman coined that term, togethership. The relating of feeling together. And yeah, so some people don't have that.
And I think, Tom, it's a brotherhood, right?
Oh yeah.
It's a brotherhood, and you have to recruit to it, right? You have to be very transparent in the recruiting, and you have to be willing to lose good, talented guys because it's not for them. And I've always said it's not the guys you get that kill you. It's not the guys you miss on in recruiting that kill you. It's the guys you get, right? So if you get a guy like that in the room that shouldn't be in the room, he's a problem, right? Because then he's going to break everybody else down.
And I'm sure you learned those lessons the hard way.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you do get a guy like that in the room because, he tricks you in the recruiting and says things that aren't true, or you miss some red flags, you got to get him out of the room, and so that's the pledge you make to your guys. Look, if we get a guy that's not the right guy, we're going to move him along. He's not going to be here making your life miserable because you're doing all the right things. We're going to all do the right things and all believe in each other. I think the other thing that was a huge help for me was I did play team sports. And so I understood the mentality of the guy that was the best player and also the mentality of the guy that was the worst player. I remember, I've told this story 100 times, but I was a sophomore basketball player and I'm on the end of the bench and I'm not getting in the game. And the game gets down to the end, we're either way ahead or way behind. And the coach looks down and you're like averting your eye contact because you don't want to go in. You're embarrassed to run out there for 25 seconds, right? You hope he doesn't put you in. And he puts you in and you go out and you run down the floor one time and then the game's over. You don't even know if you should take a shower. You didn't sweat, and it's very awkward, And so I think most coaches were good players. So they don't understand the mentality of the guy on the end of the bench and how he sees things. They know how to deal with the good guys, but not the guys on the bench. And I felt like that was a big advantage to me. And you could ask any of our teams, the last guy was treated exactly the same as the best guy. The same accountability, the same voice, the same opportunity to be successful. And I think that helped the brotherhood really be strong. And I think that was a huge part of our success is that we had an ownership attitude from everybody in the room. Everybody felt like they had an ownership attitude. Everyone felt like they could speak up. We did a thing at the end of the matches, Tom, where we'd come in the locker room and sit in a circle. And I'd say, okay, does anybody have anything? And a guy might raise his hand and say, yeah, I didn't think Matt prepared well today. I didn't think his attitude was very good. And I don't think he really helped the program. That might be the worst guy, the bottom guy on the team saying about the best guy. And when he did, everybody went, yeah, Matt, you didn't really show up today. And then Matt would be expected to say, yeah, I didn't do the right things. I'm going to do better next time. Right. I mean, to be held accountable by everybody. And that's what the circle was about, is for everybody to be held accountable to their teammates. And that's the highest level of accountability, right? That's much higher than the coach saying it, and that's what we really tried to nurture, was this team first brotherhood where we could all understand that we have these goals as a group and it's going to take all of us, to achieve those goals.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Matt. I feel, again, just lit up and grateful to have those peeks behind the curtain and to just some of those rituals and practices you had, and especially that experience of accountability, because especially young men, no one likes to be little boyed by the coach. No one wants the coach really treating them like their son and sit down and shut up because I said so, and really one-way street. I get it. There's still a hierarchy. There's still a structure there. That's why if you have the circle, you might be the center point of that circle, or you might step out and just be another point on the radius of that circle. But for the fellas to do it, for the guys to do that, just a much richer ground. And I think, I'm loath to move from some of the technical conversation around your team experience, but I see a bridge here building to this new career that you're in, which is still very much just an offshoot of what you've been doing. And one place I wanted to begin was because I can tell that you are solutions minded, not problem minded. As I tell people on the tennis court, especially lately, I say, don't focus, when you make a mistake, don't focus on the mistake, focus on the correction. If you don't know the correction, come talk to me, come talk to one of the pros. Ostensibly that's what we're here for. But otherwise, if you can name it, you can tame it. And if it doesn't pay to dwell on the mistake. And same with problems. If we're all guilty of this. I know I am. That the more you dwell on the problem, where you invest your energy, that's what makes it expand. And so to be more solutions minded, I'm curious what solutions you are engaging with. I mean, you left college tennis in when did you finish?
2018 was my last year.
2018. Okay. That feels like a bloody lifetime ago. That's coming from me. I can only imagine how you feel since you're still in a big part of that landscape. But where do you seek, and where did you seek solutions in the triangle of parent-child culture? Because for all the talk on, I mean, things we were alluding to, as Dave Anderson calls it, the adversity quotient. But I think it's interesting. You talked about a prospect you have. I believe you said he was from Europe, and of course, every country in Europe is different, and just like states are different. You get a kid from Texas, different than a kid from California, let alone Iowa or anything like that. So that's sort of the cultural aspect of, do they have a grit already instilled? Are you getting them at 17, 18 and they don't really have that a high level of adversity quotient? Yeah, I'm just curious how you were, especially on the character front. We'll hone in on that. How were you navigating the character aspect of child? I don't know how much dealings you have with parents, probably more so now, but culture as well. Because I mean, in the coaching field, I know there's a lot of rhetoric around kids are soft, kids are pampered, they don't want to work hard, they don't, they're not as
And
disciplined.
I honestly, Tom, I don't buy that at
Okay,
all.
cool.
I
Yeah,
don't, kids aren't soft, but
good.
parents are soft. Yeah,
Okay.
and I'm soft too. I mean, I was just talking to my wife about it this morning, right? And we, my son's looking for a job, and I'm helping him. I'm connecting him to people, and she's like, maybe he ought to figure out how to find those job listings, and you're like, wow, you're probably right, and so I think it's parents are soft. I didn't have help like that. I certainly had a very loving family, but I kind of had to figure things out, and I think the more that we let our kids figure things out, the better. And I think it's so kids are fine, but parents have a hard time letting them be fine. And a kid goes in, and he's on the team, any team, and he goes into the athletic director and says the coach is being hard on us. We got that early in my career at Baylor, and the AD said, "Well, it looks like it's working. Good luck, go get them." And guess what? The kid jumped back in there and went and got after it, and everything went well. Well, I hear now that a lot of coaches are not being supported like that. The player comes in and says, "I'm being pushed out of my comfort zone," and they say, "Well, we gotta make a big deal out of it and do an investigation and hold the coach accountable." And there's all this, that one of the things I'm frustrated with in leadership, and this is just bad leadership. Every coach I know of got into it because they cared about student athletes. They're student athlete centric. You're coaching tennis. You're doing tennis because you want to help people. You want to help the players.
It's service. It's
right. And I've never met a coach that in any sport at any level that didn't come to it with that attitude. Right. That we're here to help and coach and improve young people. And it's almost like sometimes the leadership in athletic departments doesn't buy into that. It's like, it seems to think that we're here to something else. I don't know what that other thing could be, but I think with great leadership that supports the coaches, great leadership that supports the players, and holds everybody accountable to a high standard, then I think everybody achieves more, right? And I think that's part of the genius of being a coach is you've got to recruit guys that buy into that and recruit parents that buy into that, right? I think you've got to have those conversations, and I said this to parents and they hated it. I think I'd hate it now if a parent said or a coach said to me, "I don't want to talk to you. You're not allowed to call me." I tell the parents, you're not allowed to call me. Now, look, if your child's having a mental health issue or there's a family tragedy, absolutely call me, right?
Yeah.
Of course, I'm here for you. But don't call me to see how practice is going or talk about the lineup or talk about development. Or you're not allowed to call me. If you feel like you have to call me, then your son can't be on my team. And a lot of parents were really stunned by that. Like, whoa. Now the thing is, Tom, and you'll get this. The players up to the side are thinking, "Oh, thank goodness, this guy's not going to let my mom come in or my dad come in and get between me and what I'm trying to achieve."
Yeah.
The kids loved it by and large, right?
Of course they do.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you, for not making, for making that clear. Now, again, not every kid, Some kids, and those are the kids that as a coach, you've got to do a great job not having in the program. Let them, there are programs that want that, that want that sort of environment. That wasn't for me. I don't think that's a way that you can win at the highest level. We were trying to win at the highest level. I don't think that fits, and it doesn't fit my personality. The way we invested in the kids, Tom, is everybody had to have an individual meeting with me every week. So,
Wow.
When I consult with companies, I say, make sure all your direct reports have a weekly meeting with you, right? And it can be a coffee, it can be, go for a jog, it can be 5 minutes, but always have a face-to-face touch, right? Where you've scheduled the hour, maybe you don't even use it. Maybe you use 3 hours, depends on the time. Sometimes we would do tennis. We'd always meet at the tennis court. We'd have our stuff, the balls and all that. And sometimes we'd come out and we'd work on their game, right? Whatever was in their developmental plan. Sometimes we'd talk about their family. Sometimes we'd talk about school. They broke up with their girlfriend, whatever their thing was, right? We had a huge breakthrough with one of my best players. We had a guy from Hungary that came in. He played in the quarters of a challenger before college. He thought he was a pretty big deal. We were really excited about him, but his expectations were up here and the reality was here. He needed to develop. He needed some steps that he wasn't willing to take. And I told him in this individual, I said, he was acting like a jackass and being stubborn and being selfish. And I told him, I said, I don't need you. If you go home tomorrow, nothing changes in my life. I'm still the coach here. We still have a great team. Everything's great. I don't need you. You need me. Because what you don't understand is that you've got incredible talent and you could be something special, but you've got some steps to take that you're just not open to taking. And next thing you know, the tears start to flow, and just boom, and I'm getting emotional about thinking about it now. And all of a sudden we're sitting here on the bench on the court and the guy is just crying like a baby. It was just a huge breakthrough, for him. He just needed to trust somebody, and to kind of take that next step. Well, again, that's a guy I'm still in touch with today, and he's 40 years old, right? We talk every week, so that relationship that I'm able to forge with him when he's a freshman in college changed everything for him, and changed everything for me in terms of our relationship. And that's really what makes coaching amazing. But again, if the leadership doesn't trust the coach to hold the kid accountable in a way that gets through that kind of first layer that a lot of people are dealing with, then again, you're not going to have the kind of impact, on a young person that we were able to have on a lot of our guys, and again, that carries over to success, after college, of course, and certainly all the things that are more important than winning tennis matches.
Yeah, I usually get emotional before the hour mark on most of these podcasts. So because that stirs me too, man. I mean, that is part of the dream. Not to make it too romantic. There's plenty of just simpler day-to-days of the grind that is tennis coaching or tennis teaching, and still, I mean, I find it now. I mean, I can't help it. It really is in my nature to just ask after people, and I am the type of person who, when I ask, "How are you doing?" I do want to know. And if someone says good and it's a flat good, I say, "Really?" And they say, "Well, no, just stuff like that." But doing that at a club, where, I mean, my tennis director encourages that approach in general, because and I would love to get your take on this. Even in a field where people, if they do seek you out for, let's say, a paid private tennis lesson, tennis coaching a little bit different, seeking your abilities as a coach of a program. But 'cause I go back and forth on this, I wonder, the saying that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And the only reason I wonder is because, if I'm going to pay you X amount of money to, although as the likes of Steve Smith say, most people will say, take my money, don't touch my strokes. They just want to go rep it out, or some people do just want someone to talk to. But I also offer services as a holistic health coach, where I touch on, my coaching tree gave me a 4-doctor system: Dr. Diet, Dr. Quiet, Dr. Happiness, Dr. Movement, touching all of those with people. And I do feel very well equipped and highly competent to share all that with people. And when I hit a roadblock, I refer it out. I try to give people better resources. But the care factor runs deep, and I do my best to let people know that I care. And I think if there's a follow-up to that, it was something I wanted to posit to you, is how do you distinguish the difference between tennis teacher and tennis coach. I know we said, and you agree, you feel like you fit the archetype of teacher and guide. I think coaching, even as I say it out loud.
No, I think it's investment, right?
Okay, yeah, take it away.
I think people can tell when you're invested in them, right? Whether you're trying to you're offering advice or not. You can tell when you're invested in someone. They can tell, and it's as simple as being on time, right? Like if I'm taking a tennis lesson from somebody and the guy rolls in, on the dot or 2 minutes late, and he's on the phone and he's getting his stuff together. Well, okay, I feel like maybe he's just here to take my money, right? But
yeah,
if he greets me when I come and he's prepared and it's clear that he's put some thought into what we're going to do, okay, that's a different level of investment, And then I think to develop the trust that someone might want to, ask you some questions or open up to you a little bit more, that's a first step, right? And then the next step is just being present, and listening. I think listening is a skill that not a lot of people are very good at.
We have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason.
Yeah, and I think that's something that people really struggle with. And so I think if you're forming a new relationship, I think again, investing, listening, being present, that opens the world to a connection, right? And I think if you're there and you're present and you're open to the chance of a connection, then a lot of times it emerges naturally. And then, when that happens, then you can start to have a bigger impact, right? And I think that's whether it's the things you talked about, your 4 things, or whatever is relevant to the situation. But you got to have that; those steps have to occur before anybody's going to really listen to what you have to say. And like you say, the more you care, the more they'll listen. They don't listen. They don't. You got to care. And so I think that's the process.
I thank you. That feels like vindication, and that's my instinct anyway. Is that, like I said, the care factor runs deep, and I know to make any change. As I was talking with my buddy last night about, generally people come to the tennis court in my environment. And I know you've been connected to this in various capacities. People are excited to be there, and it is a great deal of fun, or they're approaching it from a standpoint of at the very least, for the most part, there's a desire to improve.
Sure.
People, in my experience in the health space, usually takes a crisis for people to want to make massive change on the health front. Or, I mean, it didn't really take that from me, although I have had, thankfully, my mentor from afar, Paul Check, always talks about the pain teacher. And, for instance, every injury that I've had, Matt, first of all, I try not to slip into victim consciousness of this happened to me and oh my gosh, and now I can't play tennis and etc. I get deeply curious about every level, why this happened physically, why this happened emotionally, why this happened spiritually. And that is where I've seen the greatest turnaround. For instance, this fall, I slipped a disc in my lumbar spine while playing tennis, but it's always multifactorial. And I went deep into my laboratory of why did this happen? Why did this happen now? I was back on the court in 2 weeks, fit as a flea. And when that happened to me several years ago, I was out for months because I wasn't as curious. And those are things that I want to take to people, is to be as deeply care that much about yourself that you want to get deeply curious for your own benefit. And when you hit a roadblock, then you do seek the wisdom of someone else. And I think this is indeed our bridge to what it is that you do now. I think first and foremost, I'd be curious to hear how you, because a lot of us are tasked with explaining our value. I have to go to bat for myself and say, here's why. I mean, I can confidently say, you can take any trainer at my gym. They don't offer what I offer. They can give you a workout program. Maybe they can give you a diet program. They don't offer what I offer in terms of holistic health. And I feel like that's worth more, to be honest. How are you presenting that in your sphere of influence of this is the value that I bring to kids and families to help build for their future?
Yeah, I think there's really 3 buckets of families that we work with, right? There's bucket 1, are people that are trying to leverage their tennis to get into a really selective college, and as we know, some schools are admitting 5-10% of the applicants, right? And it's, even if you have perfect grades and your perfect test scores, it's almost impossible to get in these schools because everybody has the same thing. Other kids are trying to get onto really strong athletic, teams. Same thing, look, they're only going to add 2 or 3 every year, and tennis is an international sport, and there's a guy or a girl in Argentina and every other country we can name that's probably just as good as you are, that's vying for that spot. So, why you? There's another bucket would be the people that haven't really saved for college for whatever reason, and they need financial aid. Okay, same thing. Financial aid is pretty limited in tennis. It's not like some other sports where it's all over the place. You're going to have to be pretty strategic in how you get it. So those are really the three buckets. So job one is figuring out, what we're looking for, right? And then trying to pursue those things in a really disciplined way. And I think something that I learned a lot when I was coaching, I'd say, what schools are you looking at? They'd give you this array of schools that are in every bucket that I've just described. It's like, well, okay, I think it's gonna be really productive. You can focus on what it is that your objectives are. So, people will say things like, well, I know I play number 6 on my high school team, but I'm just going to send a letter to Stanford and see if they got to write me back. Well, why? Right? I mean, you have limited time, and the coach has limited time, and that's not a productive use of your time. Let's use your time in a structured way that actually helps. So to try to get people to think in those terms, what are my targets and how do I shoot as effectively as possible at my targets, right? And then the other thing is, how do I distinguish myself, right? Because a lot of people will say, okay, I'm going to send an email to the coach. Well, it sounds funny to say, but coaches get tons of emails. A lot of emails don't even get to the coach because they get stuck in the spam folder. These universities are very secure with their email. And if it's not recognized, the chances of it going into spam are pretty common. And then the coach doesn't have time to look at them because, again, they're busy. So you may not even get in front of the coach when you email them. 2, the coach has so many emails that he's probably not able to read them all. And so it's very difficult to actually get your story across. I can get your story across, right? I mean, I have everybody's cell phone number. Everybody knows my name in this industry. They'll take my call and they'll listen to what I have to say. And what I have to say is the narrative for you, Tom. What is your narrative that makes you special beyond your grade point average and your UTR or whatever your ranking information is? Why do I take Tom on my team versus the other 500 people that have the exact same numbers? Okay. Maybe it's, well, gosh, Tom played football in high school and he was a pretty good athlete. Tom started tennis late. Tom's left-handed. Tom serves 130 miles per hour. Tom can dunk a basketball with 2 hands. Tom's dad won the gold medal in the Olympics. Whatever it is, it's a lot of different stories, right? But Tom is from Pittsburgh, Kansas, and he doesn't have anybody to practice with, and he hits off a backboard with no indoor courts in the snow. To try, if he gets in your program with good players, he's going to improve tremendously. So whatever the narrative is, and then I'm going to be able to connect that player to the coach directly over their cell phone. So now instead of you being a guy sitting in your house in Raleigh going, I hope he'll call me back, I've sold you. I've created a narrative. You're on the phone. You're prepared for the phone call. We prepare you for the phone calls. What questions are you going to ask? What are they going to ask you? Make sure and be organized. And you're in a whole different neighborhood than you would be otherwise, right? Now, and it goes forward, right? Prepare you for the visits. What should you expect to have on the visits? What are the rules? What should you try to achieve? How does this work? What do you do if the coach that you've built a relationship with stops returning your calls? Does that mean that? What does that mean? And what do you do and how do you handle that? Well, if we have a strategy, and if we're not able to get him to start recognizing you again, then I call him. And oftentimes, it won't surprise you, Tom, coaches are nice people and they don't want to tell a kid no.
Yeah.
So it sounds sort of terrible. They kind of ghost them, so rather than saying, hey man, I don't have a spot for you. I know I like you and I've talked to you 15 times. They just ghost them and hope that they'll quit bothering them. So we want our clients to get that answer, get the no, and we'll move on to some other school. There's a lot of schools, right? Let's just move forward. But to have a healthy process, we need to have great communication from beginning to end. We need to have access. We need to have great information. And then guess what? You have a great process. We need to have somebody we can go to when a question emerges that maybe we didn't think of at the beginning. Hey, Matt, I made the visit and this happened and that happened. They don't have my major. What should I do? What's the plan? I want to be an engineer and have a 3-2 program. What is that? How does that work? How does it all come together? And they've just got someone they can go to with questions to give them great information and reduce the stress. And I tell parents all the time, Tom, I want this to be fun.
Yeah.
I want your
Yeah.
son to feel like Carlos Alcaraz or your daughter to feel like Coco Golf, because the phone is ringing.
Yeah.
Coaches want you on the team and they're pursuing you. And for a parent, you're not stressed out about, oh my gosh, what should I be doing when? How does this work? You've always got resources, somebody you can ask good questions. So that's really what it is. And I think that's how we've distinguished ourselves from all the other services. And I guess the other thing is just a commitment to having everyone win. We're super proud of our 100% success rate. And the reason is we don't work with everybody, and I tell people this, we don't work with crazy parents. We don't, right? And we all know those people. And we don't work with
They're listening.
that aren't committed, right? If I do a Zoom with the prospect after I've talked to the parents, and if I have the sense that they're not committed to the process and they're not aligned with their parents about what their goals are, then we say, hey, good luck, and we move on. And Tom, you wouldn't believe, I had a girl, the parent, she was texting and not interested and not on board. And at the end of the thing, I said, hey, good luck. And the mom called me and said, well, what happened? We want to work with you. And I said, I'm sorry, I don't think it's a good fit. And they offered to triple my fee. We'll pay anything. It's like, no thanks. Life's too short. I don't want to do that. And so, those are reasons that I think we've had a lot of success, and we've absolutely had a blast. And now the coaches are so happy to hear from me across the spectrum, whether it's, low Division III to high D1, because the kids have been screened. They know they're the right level. They know the academics are right. They know the family is right. They know they're engaged. They know the parents aren't crazy. And so I'm basically just handing them a recruit, right? Yeah. Now all you've got to do is just walk them to the finish line. So it's been a lot of fun, and it's really fun to see kids achieve their dreams and go to great schools, and then even do well when they're there. I have a girl that's on the University of Chicago team, and they just won the National Indoor. She texts me and says, hey, we won, and here's a picture of me with the trophy. That stuff's pretty cool, and we have a lot. So that's the experience.
Well, yeah, I can tell you're having fun. Just and I hope people get to watch the video of this. Just seeing you smile while you talk about it. I mean, it sounds like an adventure, Matt, for you and for the kids. And I think of The Power of Story by Dr. Jim Loehr. I have tremendous respect for him and his body of work. And for anyone, I'm also a student of I don't know if you remember or have heard of Dr. Joseph Campbell, who did the Power of Myth series. Okay, good. Because I tell everyone to watch. It's still on YouTube. Half a dozen episodes, The Power of Myth. It will change your life. First of all, I get emotional thinking about him and watching him in that series, and I just think, what if the world had more teachers like that? I mean, he was at Sarah Lawrence, I believe, for decades, and but still, I mean, my wife, when she watched it for the first time, she was just like, her reaction was gobsmacked, flummoxed. I would just kill to have any teacher like that. I mean, true mentorship, and for his messaging of you are the hero, you are the heroine of your story, to have a high school student, any 17, 18-year-old young man or woman, go through that process of starting to craft their own story is deeply profound. And this is why, I mean, I can tell you wear many hats. I mean, to then also come to, I'm also deeply motivated by a career in the brain trust. I mean, like your first mold of that was probably in the championship project, to what you do now of, I've come to really appreciate the rap sessions of coming together, say, what was your experience? What did you get? How can we learn from this? How can we strategize? But like that's fun, right? I mean, to be in the war room, so to speak, and to be able to rap with people about, did we prepare you well enough? What did you learn? How can we do better? How can we maintain? I mean, that does sound like good fun.
Great fun. Yeah. Great fun.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, for kids to be so many things for kids, parents, households to be managing. Yeah, to have someone who is going to take the reins of that, someone who is involved. I'd love to talk a little bit in our remaining time as well about the other services you offer. You said you consult with some athletic directors and college programs, and what's that? Is that also fun? Is that also a good?
That's super fun, right? Yeah, it's super fun because you're working with people that are super talented. They're doing amazing things. They're seeking, as you said, and want to get better, and are listening, and I say when I'm contacted by a potential client, I'm like, look, you might just get 1% better out of this, right? But that might be the difference between being average and being great, right? I mean, when you're at a high level, you're looking just for any little bit, to go to the next level. Look, if I say things to you that don't make sense for you and don't fit with your philosophy and you don't think are important to you, just tell me. It's not going to hurt my feelings.
Yeah.
Hey, look, man, that's not something that we're going to try to implement here. That's something I feel good about. Let's keep pulling levers and try to find things that work for you. So come to me with, the challenges that you're facing, and let's look at them from a different perspective. Let's think a little bit about how can we approach this differently. Because I do think one of the challenges of being a high achiever, right, is you've had great success with a certain method, and you can sort of beat yourself into a wall trying to just be better at your method and not being able to go, okay, what are other solutions, right? And we talked about that with teaching tennis even. And so that's super dynamic and super fun. And one of my projects, I'm getting ready to finish this book because I want to go out and make this, a bigger part of what I'm doing with my time. And I feel like, the book gives me a level of credibility beyond just my background as a coach, where I can take it outside of athletics, into a business setting. How do we achieve as a sales team? How do we achieve as a company? How do we achieve as entrepreneurs, to go and do some things that are fantastic and to continue to grow. So, I kind of view the book as a business card, if you will. Okay, this is a presentation of my ideas, and I'd love to come and help you to achieve, something special and really realize your dreams. So that's a project of mine that I think we're going to try to hopefully kick off in 2025 that I'm just super excited about.
Exciting. And that's funny because one of the members at my new club that I've had a good connection with, he handed me his book. I think I have it over my shoulder, but it's something to the effect of, I think it's called "There's No Such Thing as a Bad Kid," and he's worked as a counselor and as a therapist for many, many years, probably in his 70s now. And he spoke to that effect. He said, it does get you in the door if you can send someone your book. And I first time I published it, self-published, and then found someone to pick it up. And it is still a bit of that's still a currency that people do deal in. There's a bunch of podcasts out there, so it's definitely not quite the same. Although I will say, to my credit, there's something crazy, like, let's say there's 1 million podcasts right now. 3% of them make it over 20 podcasts, so this will be something in the 80s. You and I today, it's something that I am inspired to develop a skill set with, but akin to, I also, as much as I consider this something that is a work in progress, a skill set I'm building to articulate, to do it on the fly, to do it in a way that, of course, I'm fully present with you. And I generally, my approach is, I want to talk like no one else is listening. I'm just going to keep it to what appeals to you and I live. The written word is, I was just talking about this with someone the other night, to organize your thoughts, to be succinct. You don't want to have run-on thoughts that people aren't clear. It's a very alchemical process. It's a distillation. Would you mind saying a few words just about your writing process and what's that?
Well, I'll say this, Tom, it's darn hard.
Yeah, no kidding. No kidding.
The stats are, I don't know, if 1 million people say they're going to write a book, one of them actually writes a book, right?
That's right.
It's really hard. And I've written, I started with, 10 different outlines, right? And it's just a different book every time. And the thing that I think is really important is, it's not a book about Matt Knoll. It's not Matt Knoll's story. Nobody cares about that. It's how can we help you? What can I put out there that can have an impact on you and your life, in the context of stories that are easy to read and enjoyable, right? I think it's all about telling stories. Everybody wants to hear a story, and whether that's the story about, how I got with, Dave Marsh about winning, national championships, or whatever the stories are. We've tried to just make that what the book's about, right? And also to try to distinguish myself. I talked to a friend and she said, "What's the title?" And at the time it was something like, leadership, resilience, and grit, or whatever. She said, "Matt, there's 5 million books like that." Right? I mean, type any of those words in Amazon, and you're going to get 5 million hits. And wow, great point, right? And so, okay, that's not compelling. So that's a challenge, right? How do we sort of reframe, and think about it differently. She and I were talking more, and she was asking about goals, and I said, I don't really believe in goals, and she said, wow, really? She said, yeah, I felt like when we would set goals, we would get tense. Our goal is to win the Big 12, for example. So you get to the match that's to win the Big 12, and everybody feels nervous because this is, what we've been thinking about forever. And she said, well, you should be the ungoal guy. That's a whole different way of doing it. Nobody's doing it that way. And you'd be the only guy on the shelf that's the ungoal guy. And I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. And I'm sorry, I'm blathering on now, but
no.
After we got off the call and I kind of let that sink in, I'm like, I'm not going to sell that book to anybody. No one's going to buy the ungoal book. Yeah. And so then that gets you thinking again. And what it is, Tom, it's not that we don't set goals. It's that we don't want our guys to tense up in the key moment, right? So it's so to articulate that in a way that's understandable, digestible, and important to people is why it's so hard to write a book, right? Because that's not easy to articulate in a written form. And so that's the challenge that we're taking on. But I do think that high achievers will understand that, look, once we're in the room where the expectation is, we're gonna win a national title, we don't need to talk about that anymore. Yeah. Once we're in the room where the expectation is to win the conference, and everybody that's been recruited into this room knows that we won last year, we don't really need to talk about it anymore, right? That's just the expectation. So I think that's more what the message is building the culture and building the program, building the company to the point where the expectations get lifted to where we don't have to talk about these building block goals anymore. We talk more about performance, right? Because performance is about getting 1% better every day. Performance is about being your best on every single day. Right? And Tom, it goes to, can you really lose? Right? And I would argue, no. I use the example all the time of when, this is before your time, you're a young guy. Georgetown had the best basketball team in the country by far. Mm-hmm. And they played Villanova, who they'd beaten 3 times that year. And Villanova shot 77% in the final, which is impossible.
Yeah.
And they beat them, right? So if you're Georgetown, you're of course disappointed, but you didn't do anything wrong, right? You performed at a high level. You just happened on one day out of a million, this other team did something that they couldn't do again. Same thing in tennis, right? It's an open system sports, right? You can prepare, you can train, you can practice, you can do all the stuff. You can't control the level of your opponent. Your opponent might play at a level that they will never play again.
Yep.
Right? They might serve 85% that day, which they'll never do again. Yeah. And if they beat you, okay, you're disappointed, but okay, you didn't really lose.
That's right.
I mean, you're not a loser. You're not a loser that day. You performed, and that's what you can control. So you can control what you can control, and be good with that. Be good with putting out your best. And if it's not good enough on the day, then go back and practice more, and try to continue to improve and pursue greatness that way. So I'm blathering on because I'm excited about it. And
it's not blathering, and I'm actually going to make my own attempt at blathering because it gives me so many things that have entered my experience lately. Number one, I mean, I am deeply committed to language upgrades constantly. And like we said, you're in the throes of that right now. You're in the crucible of that right now, because to deliver that, even when we speak, Matt, I mean, you probably know this, to use a word like grit or discipline, Matt, you could literally pick any word. It will have manifold interpretations depending on who's receiving it. And that's why, as best you can, you have to, I think in general, one of my mantras is, with anything that I do, I need to make myself clear to myself before I try to make myself plain to someone else. And since language is the only tool that we have to do that, I only know one language, which is English for now. We'll see. I'm open to others, but I have to perfect it as best I can. And that does mean of the 4 agreements, the first one is be impeccable with your word. And as best you can, impeccable means not erring, not missing. I want to, as an adult, say what I mean and mean what I say. I do want to choose the word that is best, that is the best reflection of my feeling and whatever I'm trying to deliver to you, the reader and the recipient. I mean, same goes with I'm very selective with text messages that I send. We all know how text messages can go. I'm a big voice memo guy. I love to put my voice and my tone and my style behind what I'm saying, because otherwise I don't want people to misunderstand me. Two sports things that come up as well. My grandmother was from New Zealand, and so I have massive love for the sport of rugby. There have been two epic, and I mean epic, documentary series on the Springboks of South Africa, who have won the last two World Cups. Highly recommend it, Matt, if you're still into sport and coaching culture, because it's behind the scenes with them. Over to, I mean, when they won in 19, sort of a dark horse. They beat England in the final, which was a really big deal. And then when they won in 23, they had all the years of COVID where they didn't get together as a team until I think maybe 8 months before the campaign. And just an echo of what you said is that they know the goal and they don't have to harp on it every single day. Instead, it's about, was this a performance on the practice field or in this exhibition match or in this tune-up match that is reflective of that? Well, no, then we need to drill down on that as well. And I think akin to that, I just watched. I do have a lot of love for baseball, and especially old times. So there's a great Reggie Jackson documentary. I mean, he was just a savage. I mean, no one else is called Mr. October. So there's a reason for that. And watching clips of him speak, first of all, high level of accountability for. You do have to have an ego as a high performer, a healthy ego. It charges you, it keeps you driven and accountable as well. But I would watch him in these interviews with beat writers and reporters, and whenever they would challenge him, you know, I'm sure there were times when he got defensive, but these clips I saw, he said, they would challenge him on his performance or his reaction to something. He said, I agree with you and I'm here to do better. And, I'm first and foremost, I'm accountable to my team, and really inspiring there. And then one other thing he said that was just a reflection of what you were talking about. He said, I'm not a loser. I haven't lost yet. You're going to have to beat me.
Yeah.
And that means that I am in it. I am committed. I'm going to give whatever my best is on that day. And in the end, it's not going to be that I lost, or that I really lost, that I gave in, gave up, pulled back, whatever. And I think certainly a deep echo of that as well is something that I heard my mentor from afar, Paul Check, say to Gabby Reese and Laird Hamilton, two high-level individual sport athletes. He said, there's no losing, it's learning. Unless your career ends that day, and by career I mean your experience as anyone. I'll get into the court discussion as we head for home here, as we land the plane. But we all exert. We all are tasked with performance. You have to perform as a husband, as a dad, as a leader of your own business. Now, I mean, we all are tasked with some performance, and that really doesn't end. And if you classify something as a loss, and then like I said, if it's a loss and it's something that holds a negative charge for you and a defeat for you, are you curious enough to learn from that and then transmute that into something that serves you? So I don't know if you have any responses to some of what I just put down, but I'll open it up to you before I hit you with a fast flurry to bring us
No,
home.
I think we're on the same page. I mean,
Okay. Beautiful. All right. So since this is bound to be the Home Court Health podcast, we'll round out with, first and foremost, on the home front. We were talking a little bit offline about your appreciation for art, but in my worldview, home is home base. You go there to recharge, to rest. You have most of the control over that environment, unlike really anywhere else you go. You've got loved ones there. You've got so many things there to serve you. So just in general, with your home, what is something that you do or that you've done to make it that home base where you get to recharge and regroup?
Well, I think, as you say, I'm a big lover of fine art. We would love to have every wall, every space in our house be a gallery wall, and we're heading that direction.
Cool.
So that's something that we really enjoy. We're very fortunate, Tom. We live on a lake, so when I look out my back deck, I look at 100 yards of deep woods, and when you walk through the woods, you hit a lake, and so I'm able to be outside a lot. In that environment, which was something that was really important to us when we moved to North Carolina. So yeah, those are the things that kind of ground us, in our house, is being able to be outside in that environment, and also, just being really comfortable with our surroundings.
Being near the water, and any body of water, I never take that for granted growing up on Cape Cod. It does provide a special charge to your environment. And I heard a quote once that said something to the effect of, if you want a golden rule that works for everyone, it should be that, and I mean, lofty claim for sure, but especially as it pertains to the home, have nothing in your home that you don't find to be beautiful or useful.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good standard. I mean, if you're surrounding yourself with beauty, it permeates just your feeling when you're home, and then there has to be utility as well. I know we've spoken a lot about court, but you're also in a new field of play and competition and testing yourself. And I just love to hear anything that comes to mind that for your performance these days, just in this new arena, or even in the, I mean, it's still tennis and it's still athletics and scholastic and all that, but a new tactic or a new training tool, or just something new that you're playing with these days in terms of your arena
Well,
of
and the obvious one is AI, right? I mean, I think
yeah, okay.
I spent time on it this morning. I'm on it almost every day. I'm sure I have no idea how to really get the most out of it, but it's certainly a part of what I'm doing. And I would say to anybody, uh, AI is not going to take your job. Somebody that knows how to use AI is going to take your job. Um, so learn how to use it.
Yeah.
I'm not the youngest guy in the world, but I think particularly if I'm a younger person, I mean, I think you have to know how to make that part of your life. So that's something to me that I'm excited about, trying to figure out how to get more out of.
Cool. Yeah, any tool, a hammer, you can build a house with it, or you can beat someone to death with it. It is still a tool. And I mean, yeah, I didn't crunch all those numbers I was telling you about with how many balls fit in a tennis court on my own. I let AI do all that. So working smart, not hard there. And lastly, Matt, for your health, I mean, something that you consider a non-negotiable, or just something that you know to be a tried and true to keep your battery high so that you can serve people.
Yeah, I go to the gym 3 times a week, and I move every day. I think maybe the other thing I would say, as someone that used to be an athlete, I think you have to, in my experience, you have to be smart about the way you train. And as an example, when I quit trying to be, a high level athlete, I would still go out to the track and I'd run and I'd sprint the last, whatever, 200 meters, and I'd fall on the ground and be just spent and be miserable. And finally, I was like, and then I found I didn't want to come back to the track the next day, right? And all of a sudden, it became hard to be consistent because I was suffering so much. And suffering is great when you're trying to, be at the highest level.
Yeah.
When you're just trying to maintain good health, I think seeking balance is more important. And so for me now at this age, I'm just trying not to get hurt. I'm just,
Yeah.
I'm in there. I'm getting a sweat. I'm doing some nice things, but I never push myself outside my comfort zone. And it's things like I still do squats, but I've told myself I'm never going to squat over this weight ever again the rest of my life. And that weight has come down, right? To where, okay, I'm still having the movement. I'm in the squat rack. I'm doing that, but I'm not going to risk injuring myself anymore. So I think that to me has been a big part of it, is just moderating my training in a way that keeps a healthy balance and a good flow and a good spiritual health, so that I can be consistent and not, have to take time off because I'm being overzealous getting
Yeah.
home.
No, I'm with you, and importantly, Matt, what I want to acknowledge that you said is that you move every day, and that's why it's called in the 4 doctor system I learned. That's why it's called.
Hmm. Tom, you froze. I'm not sure if you can hear me, but your picture has frozen and I can't hear you anymore. It looks like it's still recording. I see the thing still ticking, but I can't hear you. Hmm.
You still there, Matt?
Still here.
Oh, Matt, you back?
I'm
Sorry
here.
about that. Probably a good signal from the internet that we got to land the plane anyway. But I did have one more question. Again, just acknowledge your commitment to, keeping the battery high, and it's more important to move well than to be strong or have the ego there. I will or finish on a bit of a lofty plane. I have print of Laird Hamilton over my shoulder, surfing what is most likely a 100. And when we had him for our session, we asked him, what is the historical 200-foot wave in your life? Like a aspiration or dream of yours. And I'll posit that to you as well, Matt. I mean, what's something that is, guiding your dream? Is you do now or for your life, and are you able to?
I'm a little embarrassed to answer that honestly. I'm kind of achieving my dream now. There's really nothing left on the table, that we're missing. We're very blessed. We get to travel a lot, which we really enjoy. We get to spend a lot of time with our kids, which we really enjoy. We get to spend a lot of time outside, which we really enjoy. We live where we want to live. We do what we want to do. So frankly, we're just really blessed, and we're going to continue to lean into those blessings and just be grateful.
Beautifully said. I'm congratulate you, and I celebrate that with you. I mean, to be honest, that's part of why I felt drawn to connect with you, that you embody the genuine clarity of what you're doing now, and where you've steered your own boat to be in this place that, feels good. You have fun with it, you have, and then your whole environment, the entirety of your life supports that. And that's to what you've created for yourself. So once again, Matt, immensely thankful for you to share your time and wisdom and experience with me today. And it's been really a treasure to have this conversation.
Tom, thanks a ton. Great meeting you. Congratulations on the great work you're doing with the podcast, and happy to be a part of it.